Iron Man's story is not only cool and entertaining, it is an archetypal tale with ancient roots that is rich with psychological insight. In Tony Stark, we find our deepest insecurities and our pathological struggle against the limitations of human life. And there are lessons we can learn from Iron Man that we can bring into our own lives. In this video, we will study Iron Man's story alongside the legend of the Greek god of the forge, Hephaestus. We will learn more not only about the archetype of the wounded craftsman, but also about ourselves as mortals living in the technological fantasy land of the 21st century. Let's briefly recap Iron Man's story. Young Tony Stark is the son of weapons manufacturer Howard Stark. Growing up, Tony exhibits extraordinary intelligence, yet suffers a difficult childhood. Not only is his father a workaholic and an alcoholic, he is also never satisfied with Tony, despite the boy's achievements. When still only a youth, the untimely death of his parents leave Tony traumatized for the rest of his life, and the sole inheritor of Stark Industries. Young Tony buries his grief in work, and in a few years turns his company into the world's leading arms manufacturer. But destiny has other plans for him. During a fateful weapons demonstration, Tony is wounded by shrapnel and kidnapped in enemy territory. Imprisoned in a cave, he has to build an electromagnet into his chest to protect his heart from shrapnel in his blood. There, he secretly constructs a suit of armor he uses to escape his prison. But Tony steps out of the cave a changed man. Ending all his arms dealing, he makes it his life's work to upgrade his suit of armor and use it to fight crime. Thus, Iron Man is born. In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or MCU, Tony's story comes to an end as he sacrifices his life to save the world from annihilation. This completes Iron Man's story arc and assimilates him into that great savior archetype of the West, Christ. Note how trauma fuels Tony's actions and motivations throughout his life. Rejected by his father, he compensates for it with his incredible intelligence and industriousness, graduating top of his class at MIT when only 17. Soon after, he loses his parents and again handles it through obsessive work. This pattern continues after Iron Man is born too. Following the events of the Avengers movie, where alien invaders nearly destroy New York, Tony develops severe PTSD and suffers from flashbacks, nightmares, and panic attacks. How does he handle it? He locks himself up in his high-tech garage and works manically on new suits of armor. He engineers around 40 different variants, calling them his Iron Legion, a mechanical army to protect him from the demons in his head. I believe the arc reactor Tony builds into his chest to keep himself alive gives us the key to his personality. We see in Iron Man the continual attempt to use intelligence, creativity, and industriousness as means of coping with trauma, physical and emotional alike. But Tony's inventions are not simply tools for dealing with pain, they are the products of his pain. Just like the fire of the forge transforms raw metal into powerful instruments, so too does Tony transform his suffering into creativity. But there is much more to unearth within this rich archetype. To do so, we will need a change of perspective, a look at the ancient roots of Iron Man in the West. Following the trail of fire and the sound of hammer striking metal, we arrive at a far older forge, the forge of an ancient monstrosity that is yet a god of fire and forges, a wounded inventor, and a friend to man. Hephaestus. Like Lucifer, Hephaestus is a fallen angel, a rejected god. Born of Hera in a fit of rage, he is cast down from the mountain of the gods by either his mother or father, accounts differ. He falls into the sea and remains there for 9 years, nurtured by the sea goddess Thetis. One day, Thetis shows up on Olympus wearing the most elaborate jewelry the gods had ever seen. Learning the jewelry is the work of her son, Hera demands that he immediately return to Olympus to work as craftsman of the gods. Reinstated in the Pantheon, Hephaestus quickly proves his usefulness by crafting weapons and armor that would go on to become legendary. He crafts Hermes' winged helmet and sandals. He builds the unbreachable gates of the underworld, and yes, he forges Zeus' thunderbolt too. Hephaestus also crafts his famous automatons, golden mechanical maidservants that are so elaborate as to seem alive and self-aware. The Iron Legion idea is much older than we would think. As the so imperfect Olympian, and the only one who has to work to earn his keep, Hephaestus became popular in ancient Greece as the god who shares in man's toils. He was worshipped as a patron of civilized man, of that human ingenuity to which we owe our survival and prosperity. Here is how Homer praises him. Sing, clear-voiced muse of Hephaestus, famed for inventions. He taught man glorious crafts throughout the world, man who before used to dwell in caves in the mountains like wild beasts. But now that they have learned crafts through Hephaestus, the famed worker, easily they live a peaceful life in their own houses the whole year round. Hephaestus represents man's inventiveness, which pulls him out of existential insecurity and into higher forms of being. The creative force propelling humanity away from wild beasts and into civilization. But for all these virtues, we should not forget Hephaestus is an ugly, deformed god. His inherent deficiency is inseparable from his creativity. This makes him a tragic deity. Beneath the surface, Hephaestus is not only the god of craftsmanship, but of what Ernest Becker calls denial of death. Hephaestus' creativity is actually secondary to what sets him apart from all other Olympians and brings him closest to man. And that is that, as a child, he nearly dies. Here is how the god himself retells his childhood trauma in the Iliad. Zeus caught me by the foot and threw me from the magic threshold, and all day long I dropped helpless, and about sunset I landed in Lemnos, and there was not much life left in me. Clearly, Hephaestus' physical wounds hide much deeper emotional trauma left by his brush with death. His knowledge of the fear of death, being rejected by his father and/or mother, and the work addiction he develops as a coping mechanism. These make the lame smith the most human of the gods, a portrait of our mortal insecurities and our desperate attempts to escape from them. The pattern of rejection punctuates Hephaestus' story. As the scholar of religion Mircea Eliade tells us, the smith archetype goes hand in hand with social isolation. Like fire, a smith is both invaluable and dangerous to those around him. In archaic societies, smelters and smiths are held to be masters of fire, but the ambivalent character of metal, laden with powers at once sacred and demonic, is transferred to the metallurgists and smiths. They are highly esteemed, but are also feared, segregated, or even scorned. In fact, Hephaestus' deformity, and Tony's injuries too, might be rooted in a widespread ancient custom. You see, our ancestors used to intentionally cripple their own smiths and artisans. Why? So that these most valuable assets may not escape and join hostile tribes. The suffering portrayed in mythical stories is always first lived out by men and women of flesh and blood. Like Hephaestus, the only lame god, Iron Man is an avenger without superpowers. A mortally wounded hero who, stripped of his tools and armor, is just as helpless in the face of death as any man. Like his Greek prototype, Tony's creativity springs from his encounters with death. First, it is the death of his parents that makes him manically focused on growing Stark Industries. Some years later, His kidnapping and shrapnel wounds produce his first suit of armor and transform him into Iron Man. And after he nearly sacrifices his life to save New York, he begins designing a suit of armor around the Earth. But it is Tony's final embrace of death that crowns him as the hero of our time. With no clever technology to hide behind, Tony is finally caught up by the choice he has been evading all his life. He has to either face his mortality or lose all he cares about. Really, a choice between responsibility and nihilism. A choice we all have to make. We can read in this final chapter of Iron Man's story a sort of initiation. In the end, Tony grows out of his playboy billionaire superhero act into the acceptance of his human limitations. Iron Man's story is not simply a reworking of the myth of Hephaestus. Rather, it is its development. The Greek myths leave Hephaestus in his forge, eternally trying to drown out his existential dread with the sound of his hammer. Not so the American myths. The armored Avenger inherits all of Hephaestus' issues, the abandonment, the work addiction, the denial of death. But he gives a novel answer to the Hephaestian condition which did not occur to our ancestors. Iron Man is the offspring of Greek mythos and the pop culture of Christian America. Through him, Hephaestus finds himself in a new land and finally matures. I believe this is because we are all collectively living out the Hephaestian tragedy. What is modern man, if not the master of technology, industry and productivity? Before what idols do we prostrate ourselves more often than science and progress? Are we not a tribe of technophile workaholics and substance abusers? We would rather engineer our own metaverse and an exodus to Mars than deal with the troublesome reality of living a human life. Today, Hephaestus rages within us like never before. The eternally crippled makers, we toil at crafting a future to deliver us from ourselves. The next iPhone, the next Tesla, the next vaccine, the next spike in Bitcoin, always chasing, always working away at the American dream of transcending the reality of our lives. Iron Man, this supreme work of modern mythos, shows us a way out of this mass psychosis. A way out of the transhumanist delusion that technology will allow man to escape from being man. The Nietzschean delusion we can craft ourselves into gods. Most of all, Iron Man's victory is an affirmation of man's inherent worth. When his technology, his genius and his wealth fail him, Tony has one last offering to make: his life. Iron Man's final act is an encouragement to release our frantic hold on technology and heroics, to turn our gaze inward and rediscover the treasures of our human, all too human nature. Like a modern-day prophet, Iron Man tears down the false idols we worship and points us back to the eternal law. He shows us the only way to grow out of our trauma is to confront it, and the only way to reclaim our life is to accept its finitude. Not only will technology and progress not deliver us from the realities of nature, they can trap us into an infantile fantasy land, which is, in fact, a prison. They can keep us away from maturing into a deeper understanding of the human condition. This is not a denial of the virtues of science and human ingenuity. It is not a surrender of our thirst for knowledge and development. Rather, it is a more mature standpoint from which to exercise our mind without falling into pathological addictions to work, possessions, or ideas. And this is not the private wisdom of Iron Man, nor of Marvel's writers. It is our common, collective wisdom emerging from the struggles of our modern soul to understand itself. Our hyper-Hephaestian culture, tempered by the wisdom of the human spirit, has given us a new chapter to a timeless story. Hephaestus has grown up into Iron Man. Iron Man has grown down into simply man. The lessons we can learn from the twin stories of Iron Man and Hephaestus are, to all intents and purposes, endless. This is of course true for any myth. But one lesson we shouldn't miss is how these stories reveal the dual nature of trauma. Trauma destroys and empowers us. It destroys us by empowering us, and empowers us by destroying us. This insight is as dangerous as it is true, and we must handle it with utmost care in our lives. We should remember Dr. Gabor Mate's words that trauma is not what has happened to us in the past, but what we do as a result of what has happened to us. It is a process, a relationship between a person and the irreducible mystery of his or her life. Trauma is an elemental force that can be a drive towards greater self-understanding, but also towards a downward spiral of self-destruction. Usually it is both. Our great hero stories, from the Epic of Gilgamesh, through the Passion of Christ, to the adventures of Spider-Man, they all teach us man's freedom and power to transform and be transformed by his suffering. They teach us that tragedy is not the end but the beginning of life's adventure, and that the boundless potential of human beings can only arise within the bounds of our mortal lives.